Vanessa stood in the center of the glass-walled break room, her voice a perfectly pitched theatrical whisper as she told the entire senior marketing team that I was sleeping with our biggest client to secure my impending promotion. I didn't cry, I didn't shout, and I didn't rush in to blindly defend myself. I just quietly ran my thumb over the edge of the blue flash drive hidden in my coat pocket, feeling the sharp plastic corner of the digital grave I had already dug for her. 72 hours later, her impeccable reputation, her finances, and her entire career collapsed into absolute ruin, and she never saw it coming. Jurisdiction: United States. For 4 years, I worked under Vanessa Sterling at Vanguard Communications in downtown Chicago. Vanessa wasn't just a boss, she was a corporate institution. She wore $800 shoes, carried herself with the terrifying grace of an apex predator, and possessed the uncanny ability to make you feel like your mere existence in her airspace was a generous favor she was granting you. To the executive board upstairs, she was a visionary rainmaker who consistently delivered results. To the 23 exhausted people trapped under her direct management, she was a psychological suffocator. Vanessa had constructed a perfect, self-sustaining ecosystem of dysfunction on the 9th floor. She had her scapegoats, the junior coordinators who absorbed the blame whenever her poorly planned campaign metrics dipped. And she had her golden child, Kyle. Kyle was a remarkably mediocre strategist with a great haircut and an expensive smile who somehow always ended up presenting my data analysis in the executive briefings. He was Vanessa's designated echo chamber, her willing accomplice, and her personal spy. The betrayal I experienced was deeply layered. It wasn't just Vanessa. It was the entire culture she had cultivated, a culture that enthusiastically rewarded complicity and actively punished competence. I had always kept my head down. I let her slap her name on my meticulously researched slide decks. I stayed until midnight on countless Fridays fixing her disastrous budget miscalculations while she attended charity galas and industry mixers. I had been the perfect, compliant, silent workhorse, believing that my compliance was a shield. I thought that by making myself undeniably useful, I was making myself safe from her toxicity. I was playing by the rules of a game she had already rigged against me. I remember the exact week the atmosphere in the office violently shifted. It was subtle at first. A sudden, heavy silence when I walked into the communal kitchen. The quickly averted eyes of the junior copywriters. The lingering, uncomfortable, almost predatory glances from the male executives during Monday morning stand-ups. For a month, I thought it was just the intense pressure of the impending quarterly reviews. I was officially up for the Director of Accounts position, a role that would essentially put me on equal footing with Vanessa, removing me from her shadow. I had recently secured the Foreign Industries account, a multi-million-dollar whale of a contract that single-handedly saved our Q2 profit margins. I assumed the tension was just the natural friction of corporate ambition. I was dangerously naive. Vanessa hadn't just planted seeds. She had orchestrated a highly coordinated smear campaign. She didn't do it in trackable emails or formal meetings. She did it in the liminal spaces of corporate life, the 2 minutes before a Zoom call started, the quiet elevator rides to the lobby, the casual after-work drinks that I was deliberately excluded from. She crafted a narrative so toxic, so deeply rooted in structural misogyny, that the office swallowed it whole. According to Vanessa, the only reason Marcus Thorne, the 52-year-old CEO of Thorne Industries, signed a massive retainer with a 32-year-old account manager like me as because I was spending my late evenings in his penthouse suite at the Four Seasons. It was Kyle who made sure the rumor reached the ears of the HR director, carefully disguised as deep concern for my professional well-being and the company's optics. I found out the specific details on a rainy Tuesday. A colleague from accounting pulled me into a deserted stairwell, unable to even look me in the eye. She stared at her own hands and repeated the exact words Vanessa had been feeding the floor. My blood ran cold. The physical sensation of true, visceral betrayal doesn't feel like burning anger at first. It feels like a sudden, terrifying drop in atmospheric pressure. Your ears ring, your vision narrows. The world becomes intensely, painfully quiet. She couldn't fire me because my numbers were flawless. She couldn't block my promotion on merit. So she decided to destroy my character, transforming me from a rising star into a cheap punchline. For 2 agonizing weeks after I discovered the truth, I did absolutely nothing. I walked into that office every single day and let them look at me. I sat in strategy meetings and took diligent notes while Vanessa smiled at me from across the mahogany table, her eyes glittering with the smug, sickening satisfaction of someone who believes they have completely dismantled another human being without leaving a single fingerprint behind. I smiled back. I let her think she had won. I let her think I was broken, paralyzed by the shame of a disgusting lie I couldn't possibly disprove. I sat in the darkness of my apartment those nights, staring at the ceiling, feeling the crushing weight of that manufactured shame, realizing exactly how effectively she had weaponized my own desire to avoid conflict. If you are listening to this, and you have ever found yourself shrinking in the presence of someone who demands your silence, you need to understand the fundamental difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is feeling bad about a specific thing you did. Shame is feeling bad about who you fundamentally are. Narcissistic systems, whether within a toxic family unit or a corporate hierarchy, thrive on injecting you with shame. They take your natural empathy, your desire to be a team player, your deeply ingrained instinct to keep the peace, and they turn it into a psychological cage. They convince you that fighting back is unprofessional, dramatic, or crazy. But keeping the peace when someone is actively destroying your reputation isn't taking the high road. It's just slow, agonizing self-destruction with a polite name. You cannot ever reason with a predator who actively benefits from misunderstanding you. The only way out is to stop playing their game and start playing your own. You have to stop trying to prove your innocence to people committed to your guilt. Document everything, lock down your emotions, and build your exit quietly. I stopped trying to figure out how to defend my reputation against a ghost, and instead, I started looking relentlessly into hers. I knew Vanessa's careless arrogance better than anyone. A woman who believes she is completely untouchable and her personal conduct is almost always fatally sloppy in her professional conduct. She felt inherently entitled to other people's hard work, which meant she likely felt entitled to other people's money. As a senior manager, I didn't have access to the master corporate ledger, but I did have authorized access to the vendor portals for our quarterly marketing events. Events that Vanessa supposedly managed the budgets for. Events that always seemed to run inexplicably over budget, requiring emergency supplementary funds to be approved at the last minute. I stayed late on a Friday evening. The office was dead silent, the cleaning staff having already moved down to the 12th floor. The city lights bled through the rain-streaked windows, casting long, distorted shadows across the rows of empty cubicles. I logged into the secure server and started cross-referencing the approved vendor invoices I had archived against the final expense reports Vanessa had submitted for the past 3 years. I didn't need to find a smoking gun immediately. I just needed to find a single loose thread. What I found inside that encrypted vendor folder changed everything I thought I knew about the past 4 years, and it was the exact moment I stopped being her victim and started repairing her execution. That was the setup. Now here's where I stopped being patient and started being precise. The emotional fog evaporated entirely, replaced by a cold, clinical clarity. My hands finally stopped shaking. I pulled up the first master spreadsheet. Vanessa had a very specific, deeply ingrained pattern. Every quarter, Vanguard hosted a massive, poorly tracked executive retreat. The event budgets were enormous and incredibly easy to skim if you possessed the right level of authorized access. I cross-referenced the vendor portal with her 2023 expense reports. At first glance, everything looked perfectly legitimate. The math added up. But then I noticed the repetitive invoice numbers for a vendor listed as the Oasis Grand Hotel. I tried to pull the original receipts for the second quarter. The PDF was completely corrupted. The server just kept spinning, throwing a persistent 404 error that made my chest tighten. I had to dig through an archived email chain from an old assistant just to find the raw billing codes. It took me 3 grueling hours to verify one date, my eyes burning from the monitor. But when I finally matched the data, the discrepancy screamed at me. Vanessa was consistently booking 20 VIP executive suites for these retreats, but Vanguard only had 14 executives attending. She was generating phantom hotel invoices through a shell LLC registered under her maiden name, submitting them, and pocketing the difference. The Oasis Grand wasn't a luxury hotel. It was a registered P.O. box in Delaware. For 3 years, she had been systematically siphoning funds right under the noses of the finance department. The fraud totaled exactly $86,845.50. I immediately began printing hard copies, refusing to rely on the company's server for another second. If you are listening to this, and you suspect financial abuse or corporate fraud, you must understand one critical rule. A paper trail is not just a collection of documents. It is the architectural blueprint of your survival. A digital file can be wiped by a panicked IT department in 60 seconds. But physical evidence locked in a safe cannot be deleted. You build your fortress offline, long before you ever declare war, because financial abuse always leaves evidence if you are patient enough to look for it. I locked the final printed invoices securely in the trunk of my sedan. I had the weapon. Now I just needed the right battlefield. I didn't know it then, but the perfect opportunity was already scheduled on the corporate calendar just 4 days away. The Q3 Executive Marketing Review. It was the most important meeting of the entire fiscal year. The CEO and all department heads would be in the main conference room. It was also the exact meeting where Vanessa was scheduled to formally announce the new director of accounts. The position meant for me. For the next 3 days, I played my part flawlessly. I walked through the office with the appropriate level of subdued shame. I let Kyle smirk at me by the communal coffee machine. I let him make loud, pointed, incredibly unprofessional jokes about client relations and hotel loyalty points while the junior staff nervously looked away. I just nodded, kept my voice steady, and went straight back to my desk. I didn't cry. I took action. Every time Vanessa shot me a condescending glare of faux sympathy across the bullpen, I just pictured the Delaware P.O. box. On Thursday afternoon, exactly 24 hours before the big presentation, Vanessa called me into her corner office. She closed the heavy wooden blinds. She sat behind her massive oak desk, steepling her perfectly manicured fingers, wearing a mask of deep, maternal concern. She told me, in that perfectly modulated theatrical whisper, that due to recent optics and distracting rumors regarding my relationship with Marcus Thorne, she simply couldn't just find my promotion to the board. She actually had the audacity to say it was for my own good. She claimed the executive team needed a candidate with unimpeachable judgment to lead the division. A candidate like Kyle. "I'm sure you understand, Claudia," she murmured, offering me a tight, sympathetic smile that didn't even come close to reaching her cold eyes. "We have to protect the integrity of the firm at all costs." I let out a short, humorless laugh. I didn't argue with her. I didn't frantically defend myself. I just looked at her, truly looked at her, and realized how remarkably small she actually was. She wasn't a corporate titan. She was just a common thief hiding behind a designer suit and a vicious smear campaign. "I understand completely, Vanessa," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Integrity is absolutely everything." She looked momentarily unsettled by my complete lack of resistance. She expected tears. She expected a frantic, messy defense. When you deny a narcissist their expected emotional reaction, you short-circuit their entire programming. But she quickly recovered, dismissing me with a careless wave of her hand. That night, I didn't sleep a single wink. I sat at my dining table, organizing the flash drive. The Q3 review required a massive, 100-slide PowerPoint presentation. As the senior account manager, it was my standard job to compile the raw slides from all the different teams, format them, and load them onto the master drive for Vanessa to present. She never checked the slides beforehand. She was far too arrogant for that kind of grunt work. She just confidently clicked the clicker and read whatever data appeared on the screen. I inserted 3 brand new slides into the very middle of the presentation, right after the Q3 budget overview section. I didn't use flashy graphics or subtle hints. I just used raw, higher resolution screenshots. The Shell LLC registration documents. The Phantom Oasis Grand invoices. The matching, undeniable deposits into a private bank account bearing her exact legal name. Black text on a stark white background. Impossible to misinterpret. Impossible to ignore. I pulled the blue flash drive from my laptop, feeling the cold metal casing against my palm, knowing that when the clock struck 10 tomorrow morning, the entire 9th floor was going to burn to the ground. What I've told you so far is how she broke me down in the shadows. What comes next is how I dismantled her in broad daylight. Friday morning, 9:45 a.m. The main executive conference room smelled like dark roast coffee, expensive cologne, and high-stakes anxiety. The entire senior management team was present, including Richard, the CEO of Vanguard Communications, sitting at the head of the massive frosted glass table. Kyle was seated near the front row, practically vibrating with smug anticipation. He was already wearing a new, overly expensive silk tie for his unofficial coronation. I walked to the front podium. My hands were freezing, the tips of my fingers completely numb. I slid the blue flash drive into the presentation laptop. The system lagged. The agonizing corporate loading wheel spun on the screen for 10 terrifying seconds while my heart hammered against my ribs, making me briefly panic that the IT security software had corrupted the files. But then, the Vanguard Master title slide flashed onto the projector. I stepped back, fading into the quiet corner of the room, blending into the background exactly the way Vanessa had trained me to. Vanessa took the floor. She smoothed her designer blazer, commanding the room with her usual theatrical perfection. For the first 20 minutes, she was brilliant. She walked the board through the Q3 growth metrics, her voice dripping with that manufactured, corporate warmth she used to hypnotize the executives. This quarter's success ultimately comes down to integrity, Vanessa announced, her eyes sweeping the room before landing pointedly on Kyle. We need leadership that embodies unimpeachable character. People who put the firm above their own personal distractions. She didn't look at me, but the entire room felt the heavy, suffocating weight of her smear campaign hanging in the air. Let's move to the event budget breakdown, she said, pressing the remote clicker in her hand. She didn't even look at the screen behind her. But I did. And so did Richard. The screen didn't show the standard Q3 pie charts. It displayed a high resolution, heavily magnified scan of the articles of organization for a Delaware shell company named Oasis Management Group LLC. Registered agent, Vanessa Erling. As you can see, our vendor optimization Vanessa started, before noticing the complete lack of movement in the room. She turned around. She froze. The laser pointer trembled in her grip, a tiny red dot violently shaking across her own forged signature on the massive projection screen. It seems we have a slight technical glitch, she stammered, her voice suddenly an octave higher, completely stripped of its usual authority. She mashed the button on the clicker, but the battery was dying, the Bluetooth signal weak. She clicked it 3 more times in rapid, panic succession. The slide finally advanced. It was substantially worse. It showed the physical photograph of the Delaware P.O. box associated with the Oasis Grand Hotel, placed directly next to Vanguard's official corporate wire transfer receipts. A bright yellow circle highlighted the matching dates and the final stolen sum, $86,450. Richard took off his glasses. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking suddenly old and exhausted. The room went dead silent. The kind of silence that actually rings in your ears. Kyle, the ever-loyal golden child, physically shifted his ergonomic chair backward, instinctively trying to put distance between himself and the blast zone. You wouldn't even look at her. I looked right into Vanessa's terrified, wide eyes. Those are the real Q3 budget metrics, Vanessa. I kept my voice steady. She didn't scream. She didn't offer a brilliant, manipulative excuse. She just stood there, her mouth slightly open, the perfectly constructed facade of the apex predator shattering into a million jagged pieces on the conference room floor. The silence stretched for another suffocating 10 seconds before Richard finally spoke. Vanessa, the CEO said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register that left absolutely no room for interpretation. My office. Right now. The HR director immediately stood up and followed them out. The heavy glass door clicked shut. The remaining executives sat completely frozen in their leather chairs, staring blankly at the screen. Nobody looked at me. Nobody whispered. They were looking at the undeniable proof of a felony, realizing that the woman who had been aggressively lecturing them about unimpeachable character had been robbing them blind. For years. I didn't stay to gloat. I quietly walked back to my desk. I packed my bags. If you're listening to this and something feels intimately familiar about being targeted by a smear campaign, you need to understand this. When someone is actively trying to destroy your reputation, your first instinct is to defend yourself, to scream your truth, to fight them in the mud. But you cannot reason with someone who benefits from misunderstanding you. Boundaries are simply a description of what you will and will not accept. Enforcing them is not cruelty, it's clarity. People who scream the loudest about loyalty have usually done the least to earn it. I didn't need to argue with Vanessa about whether or not I was a good person. Leaving quietly, legally, and permanently with the unarguable evidence left neatly on the table is the most powerful thing you can do. I walked out of the building at 10:30 a.m., stepping into the cool Chicago air. The relief was overwhelming. I had done it. I had cleared my name without ever saying a single word about the rumors, and I had exposed her in front of the exact people whose opinion she desperately cared about. What I'm about to tell you is the part I almost left out. But you need to hear it. I thought the worst was over when I saw building security heading up to the 9th floor to escort her out. I didn't know that Vanessa had managed to make one final, desperate phone call from Richard's office before they confiscated her company phone. And I didn't know that when I arrived at my apartment an hour later, there would be 2 uniformed police officers waiting for me in my lobby. I thought the worst was behind me. I was wrong because a cornered narcissist, stripped of their narrative control, is the most dangerous version of themselves. 2 Chicago police officers were standing firmly next to the marble concierge desk when I walked into the lobby of my apartment building. My blood ran cold, a sudden, sharp spike of adrenaline hitting my system. Vanessa hadn't used her one phone call from Richard's office to contact a defense attorney. She had maliciously dialed 911. In a spectacular, terrifying display of frantic delusion, she claimed I had physically assaulted her, stolen a highly classified company laptop, and was actively attempting to extort her with heavily doctored financial documents. She was desperately trying to frame me for corporate espionage, hoping to invalidate my evidence and muddy the legal waters before Vanguard's internal auditors could officially free as her network access. I didn't panic. I asked the officers to step into the lobby's quiet, glass-paneled resident lounge. I didn't offer a dramatic, tearful counter-narrative. I simply unlocked my phone and showed them the time-stamped email from Richard, the CEO, sent exactly 22 minutes prior, officially placing me on paid administrative leave while the company investigated Vanessa Sterling for felony financial fraud. I handed them the direct business card for Vanguard's corporate counsel. It took exactly one brief radio call to their dispatcher for the officers to realize they were being cynically used as pawns in a desperate white-collar cover-up. They left with frustrated sighs, apologizing for the intrusion and muttering about filing criminal charges for a false police report. That pathetic stunt was the last offensive move Vanessa ever made. By Monday morning, Vanguard's forensic accounting team had completely seized her digital footprint. They didn't just find the Oasis Grand Hotel shell company. They found a secondary offshore account used to siphon funds from various client hospitality budgets over 5 years. The total stolen wasn't just $86,000. It was closer to $250,000. Vanguard terminated her employment immediately for cause, instantly stripping her of her unvested stock options, her healthcare, and her 6-figure severance package. Then, to protect their own liability, they handed the entire internal audit file directly over to the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. However, the fallout wasn't a clean, cinematic victory. The secure video connection in the legal department's conference room kept buffering during external calls, and I had to sit through excruciating, hours-long depositions with Vanguard's abrasive corporate defense lawyers. They treated me less like a brave whistleblower and more like a massive, unpredictable liability. They were absolutely terrified that the vile rumors Vanessa had spread about me and Marcus Thorne would leak to the industry press, exposing the company's severely toxic management, culture, and potentially costing them their most lucrative client. On a dreary Thursday afternoon, Richard called me back into the same room where Vanessa's career had ended. He offered me the director of accounts position, complete with a 20% salary bump and a substantial retention bonus which was clearly thinly veiled hush money. He slid a thick, legally binding non-disclosure agreement across the desk, effectively demanding my permanent silence about Vanessa's embezzlement and the toxic work environment at Vanguard had allowed to flourish. I let out a short, humorless laugh. I looked at the dense legal jargon sitting on the table. 3 months prior, I would have signed it just to keep the peace. I would have accepted the hollow promotion, swallowed the trauma, and gone right back to working for a corporate system that had been perfectly willing to watch my reputation burn. Just a week earlier, if you are listening to this, and you are facing a corporate machine trying to buy your silence, you must realize one critical thing. A document signed before a conflict is basic self-preservation, but a document signed after a massive betrayal is just a muzzle you purchase for yourself. Financial abuse is still abuse, and it leaves hard evidence that corporations will desperately try to bury to protect their pristine optics. The real cost of keeping it in the firm is your own integrity. Earning a promotion in a poisoned well doesn't make you successful, it just makes you the new manager of a deeply toxic hierarchy. I didn't sign the NDA. I declined the promotion. I placed my corporate access badge on top of the unsigned contract and handed Richard my formal resignation, effective immediately. Leaving Vanguard meant walking away from my primary source of income, but it also meant taking all of my leverage right out the door with me. Without my signature on that non-disclosure agreement, Marcus Thorne, the 52-year-old CEO I was supposedly sleeping with, was perfectly free to read the public indictment that eventually hit the front page of the local Chicago business journals. When Thorne realized that Vanguard's senior leadership had allowed a junior executive to be viciously smeared just to cover up a massive embezzlement scheme involving his own retired fees, he didn't just pull his multi-million-dollar account. He publicly severed ties with Vanguard, issuing a devastating press release citing a catastrophic breach of corporate ethics. Vanessa's perfectly curated life unraveled with terrifying, unstoppable speed. Without her massive Vanguard salary, the luxury lifestyle she had built on a foundation of stolen money completely collapsed. Her husband, who apparently had zero knowledge about the Shell LLC or the $250,000 fraud, filed for a highly publicized divorce the exact week her criminal charges went public, aggressively freezing her remaining legal assets in a vicious probate battle. Kyle, her endlessly loyal golden child, found himself completely isolated in the office. With Vanessa gone and the Thorne account completely lost, his profound strategic mediocrity was starkly exposed to the new management. He no longer had anyone to steal presentations from or shield him from actual work. He was quietly let go during the next round of corporate restructuring, escorted out of the building carrying a small cardboard box of his belongings, entirely unmourned by the Jun-Ire staff he had spent years tormenting. What I am about to tell you next is the part I almost completely left out, but you absolutely need to hear it. I genuinely thought I had removed her from my life permanently. I thought the state's attorney and the divorce lawyers had dismantled her entirely. But what I found waiting for me in a plain manila envelope on the doorstep of my new consulting firm 6 months later proved a terrifying reality. A completely destroyed narcissist, stripped of their money and their power, doesn't just disappear into the shadows. They obsess, they wait, and they plan their final desperate move. I stood in the doorway of my new consulting firm, the heavy manila envelope weighing down my hands. There was no return address, just my name scrawled in a very familiar, sharp cursive. Inside wasn't a retaliatory lawsuit or a terrifying legal threat. It was a 5-page, frantically handwritten letter. The ink was slightly smudged in the corners. Vanessa wasn't threatening me. She was begging me. She tried to deploy the final, most desperate weapon in the narcissist's arsenal, my own empathy. She spun a frantic, deeply disjointed story about crushing credit card debt, a failing, loveless marriage, and the intense, unbearable pressure of maintaining her elite corporate image. She actually asked me, the exact woman whose career and reputation she had enthusiastically tried to destroy just a few months prior, to contact the state's attorney and tell them that I had fabricated the flash drive. She wanted me to claim it was all a terrible misunderstanding. She literally wrote the words, "I know you have a good heart, Clara. Please don't let them ruin my life over a simple mistake." I didn't feel a sudden surge of vindictive triumph. I didn't feel the urge to call her and scream into the receiver. I just felt profoundly, overwhelmingly tired. I walked over to the heavy-duty industrial shredder in the corner of my new office. I didn't even read the last 2 pages of her desperate apologies. I just fed the thick, expensive, manicured stationery directly into the steel teeth, listening to the satisfying, mechanical grind of her psychological manipulation turning into us. Less paper confetti. 2 months later, the criminal proceedings officially concluded. Vanessa didn't even make it to a dramatic trial. Faced with the overwhelming, irrefutable paper trail I had secured from the Oasis Grand Shell Company, her public defender advised her to take a plea deal. She was sentenced to 18 months in a minimum security facility in downstate Illinois, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. The judge also ordered full financial restitution of the $86,450 she had stolen. To pay the court-ordered fines and her mounting legal debts, she was forced to liquidate her pristine downtown condo and declare personal bankruptcy. The untouchable corporate predator of the 9th floor had officially lost every single asset she had spent her life fiercely protecting. If you are dealing with someone who has fundamentally betrayed you, you must remember this truth. They will always try to use your best qualities against you in the end. They will demand your unconditional forgiveness while completely avoiding their own accountability. No contact is not a dramatic overreaction. It is a necessary medical decision. It is the sterile, unbreakable boundary you must place around a toxic infection so it can no longer spread into your healthy tissue. I didn't owe Vanessa my forgiveness, and I certainly didn't owe her my active participation in her desperate delusion. What do I know now that I didn't know before I walked into that rainy Chicago office 4 years ago? I used to genuinely believe that keeping your head down was a valid, professional survival strategy. I thought that if I was just quiet enough, useful enough, and agreeable enough, the predators in the room would simply pass over me to find easier prey. This entire experience broke that illusion completely. Silence doesn't protect you from toxic people. It just makes you their absolute preferred target. It signals that you are entirely willing to absorb their dysfunction without ever issuing an invoice for the psychological damage. Now, I no longer wait for the corporate system to validate my worth or protect my hard-earned reputation. I document my reality, I set my professional boundaries in solid concrete, and I never, ever let someone else hold the pen when my story is being written. Have you ever stayed silent when you should have started building a paper trail? So what do you think? Did I go too far or not far enough? Let me know in the comments below.